So what I wanted to ask you, in terms of selling higher end, higher tier luxury cars
Right.
versus the lower end, more affordable cars,
Right.
when it comes to the profit that this dealership makes, which tier does the most of the heavy lifting in terms of profits? Is it the luxury end cars that make most of the money for you guys, or is it the lower tier, everyday type of buyer type of cars?
That's a very good question. That's an amazing question. So here's the answer for you. There are some dealerships out there who only deal with cheap cars, and there are some dealership out there who only deals with high-end stuff. For example, there's a dealership in Thornhill, Ontario.
Yeah.
It's called well, I'm not gonna say what it's called, but there's a dealership that only deals with high-end stuff. They have their inventory is pretty much above $400,000 each car.
Wow.
Each car.
So they purely focus
Purely
on luxurious cars.
luxurious cars, not even the production cars that you see every day. For example, like a Brabus G-Wagon,
Wow.
which is something that they have. It's like they have different sets of. They have supercars. They have whatever a rich guy can pretty
Yeah,
much afford,
I
right?
see.
And then like they have a Lamborghini Aventador SVJ. It's 1 out of 500. So there's numbers for those Aventadors, right? You have from 1 to 500 in that SVJ,
Yeah.
and then that's number 1, which is the most expensive.
Lower the number is, does that affect the price?
Exactly. The lower the number, the higher the price, and those guys are not selling it.
So if it's like Aventador number 1 out of 500, it's a lot more expensive than like number 10 out of 500.
Exactly. So about 2 weeks ago, there was an Aventador here, a red Aventador S, that was 378 out of 500. Still really expensive, around $500,000 Canadian.
Wow.
But yeah, that one is 1.5 million.
Nice.
Yeah, 1.5 million, and they're not even selling it, so it goes higher in price.
So they're specifically holding on to the car to have it as an investment, kind of, to have wait for the price to go up. Is that what's
Exactly,
happening?
exactly. So those cars are investments.
I see.
You would think that when I buy a car, it depreciates and the value drops, but on some cars, that does not apply. On these expensive cars, you have antiques, which you could have, that are really expensive, and the value only goes up and it doesn't come down because they don't really put kilometers on it, right?
I see.
So when they don't put kilometers on it, the car really doesn't depreciate. So because they're not using it,
Makes
they're
sense.
using for like collectors. Collectors collect a lot of them.
It's so funny because people always associated buying a Lamborghini with a bad financial investment. They always say, yeah, don't buy assets instead of liabilities, and they always associate Lamborghini specifically with that.
Right.
But these past couple of years, Lamborghinis have been going up in price. Now, I wanted to know, what's your take on the fact that, obviously, I'm talking about in Canada. In Canada, by 2032, I think, they're planning on completely making the sale of gas cars illegal.
Right.
So it's only going to be electric cars. Now they're doing this for the environment or whatever, but gas cars are going to be completely illegal to sell and trade. So what's your take on that? And do you think that might make gas cars like these, these exclusive Lamborghinis and these collectible gas cars skyrocket in value?
There's a really good quote. I wouldn't say quote, but there's a really good saying that I heard from the astrophysicist that was, do you guys remember the show Cosmos?
Yeah,
Cosmos,
I remember that.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, right?
Yeah.
He was saying that basically what's future is going to look like is cars are for driving are only going to be for fun on the racetracks. And he was comparing it to horses, right?
Yeah.
So you have horses in 1920, 1910, 1900. Before that, obviously,
Yeah.
it was always horses,
Yeah.
right? Or a mule or whatever. But in 1920, like they traveled with horses and carriages and all that.
Yeah.
And then in 1900s, everything changed, right? Cars came
out.
and only people who were really rich could afford cars.
Right.
Like the first production car was made by Henry Ford,
Right.
right? And so basically only really rich people could afford it, and it was something that was really exotic to people.
Yeah.
But then after a certain amount of time, cars they became normal, and people use it more and more, and they realized, oh, it's so much better than horses.
And they started to replace horses.
And what happened to horses? You can only use it. It's the fun thing now. You can only use it in a stable, or you use it somewhere if you want to go in hiking, whatever. You can use it, right? But you're not really riding it unless you're not seeing anyone riding it in the city.
Yeah.
So he thinks the same thing is going to happen to cars.
He thinks
now.
the same thing is going to happen to cars. No, not cars. He thinks the same thing is going to happen to driving. You driving. It's going to become all self-driven cars.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Which makes a lot of sense, right?